Adrian Vale was killed by his own brother Julian after a lifetime of being treated like an outsider in the Vale family. His father had hidden a second marriage, his mother had died from heartbreak, and Adrian was brought home only to be humiliated by Julian and Marin at every turn. When the time came for a marriage alliance with the wealthy Hart family, Julian chose the elegant elder daughter, Celeste, while Adrian was forced to marry the disgraced younger daughter, Viola. Everyone believed Adrian had been given the lesser bride. They were wrong. Viola was the one Charles Hart secretly cherished, and within a year she gave birth to triplet sons. Charles, obsessed with legacy, adored the boys and promised Adrian the Hart Empire if the children carried the family name. Bitter and jealous, Julian sabotaged the house, causing a fatal gas explosion that killed Adrian, Viola, and the children. Adrian woke up back on the day the brides were chosen. This time, Julian proudly claimed Viola, thinking he had discovered the better prize. Adrian quietly accepted Celeste and signed away his Vale inheritance, knowing the family company was already built on illegal dealings and would eventually collapse. At the joint wedding, Adrian unexpectedly impressed Charles Hart's influential guests, while Julian was ignored. Adrian also discovered Celeste had once fallen in love with the boy who saved her from drowning years ago, and that boy had been him. As the marriage alliance deepened, Julian grew arrogant and obsessed with inheriting Hart enterprises through false heirs and manipulated paternity claims. But Adrian had already learned the truth in his past life. Viola was secretly involved with Charles's assistant, and Julian's children were never his. When the conspiracy finally unraveled, Julian and Marin were exposed, Charles turned against them, and the Vale family's criminal empire collapsed. In the end, Adrian didn't just survive. He claimed the company, protected the people he loved, and built a real family with Celeste, one founded on trust, not greed. Tone. This version has a more elite, Western family feel with mansion drama, inheritance battles, corporate power, romantic history, and revenge-driven emotional payoff. I can also turn this into a full Western name story, a YouTube narration script, or a long 25,000-character version in the same style. Full story. Here is a full Western-style version of the story, with fresh names, smoother flow, and the same revenge romance energy. Dorian Blackwood died once because his own brother could not bear to see him win. In his first life, everything had gone wrong in the exact same way from the moment his father announced the marriage alliance. The Blackwood family was already fractured long before that day. Dorian was the child people tolerated, not the child they loved. His father had built a second life behind closed doors, and when the truth came out, Dorian's mother could not survive the humiliation. She drowned herself in a river on the edge of town, leaving him behind with a man who had never truly protected her and a stepmother who never forgave his existence. From that day on, Dorian lived like a trespasser in his own home. His stepmother, Marissa Blackwood, treated him with polished cruelty. His half-brother, Killian, learned early that humiliation was a sport, and Dorian was the easiest target in the house. They laughed at him, insulted him, and made sure he understood that no matter how many years he spent under the Blackwood roof, he would never truly belong there. Then came the marriage arrangement with the Bellamy family. The Bellamys were old money, powerful and proud, with a fortune built over generations. Their patriarch, Dominic Bellamy, was old-fashioned in the way powerful men often are. He believed in bloodline, legacy, and heirs who could carry his name forward. He had two daughters. The elder, Genevieve, was graceful, intelligent, and painfully proper. The younger, Rosalie, was a secret the family tried hard to hide. Born from a scandalous affair, she was considered the stain on the Bellamy name. Killian chose Genevieve. Dorian was left with Rosalie. At first, everyone thought Dorian had been handed the worst bargain. Rosalie was the illegitimate daughter, the one nobody talked about in public. Killian smirked as though he had won some grand victory, while Dorian was expected to swallow his shame and accept whatever scraps remained. But fate had other plans. Rosalie was not weak. She was quiet, yes, and careful, but she had a strength that most people missed because they were too busy judging her background. In the first year of their marriage, she gave birth to triplet sons. 3 boys. 3 heirs. Dominic Bellamy was overjoyed. He adored those children with the kind of fierce pride only a man obsessed with legacy could understand. He carried them in his arms, laughed like a boy himself, and declared that the Bellamy bloodline had finally been secured. "I only had 2 daughters," he said once, looking at the babies in his arms with shining eyes. "But now I finally have grandsons." Then his gaze moved to Dorian. "If you allow those boys to carry the Bellamy name, I'll make the papers today. The company will be yours." Dorian agreed. That decision sealed his fate. Killian never recovered from the humiliation. He watched Dorian rise under Dominic's favor while his own marriage to Genevieve remained cold and barren. Years passed. Dorian's sons grew into lively, intelligent boys, and Dominic's affection only deepened. By the time the triplets were 7, Killian had no children, no useful alliances, and no path to the inheritance he thought should have been his by right. The jealousy rotted him from the inside. 7 years after the wedding, Killian visited Dorian's house under the pretense of family peace. He smiled, drank tea, laughed at the right moments, and waited until Dorian was distracted. Then he slipped into the basement, turned on the gas line, and walked away. The explosion came a moment later. Fire swallowed the house. Dorian died with his wife and children screaming somewhere beyond the smoke. And then he woke up. He was back on the day the brides were chosen. The same drawing room. The same polished table. The same family tension hanging in the air like a storm ready to break. Only this time, Dorian knew what was coming. Before he could speak, Killian leaned forward and said, with smug certainty, "I've made my decision. I'll marry Rosalie Bellamy." The room went quiet. Dorian's heart beat once, hard. Killian had come back too. That much was obvious from the way his mouth curved, from the ugly satisfaction in his eyes. He thought he had learned the lesson from the first life. He thought he was smarter this time. He wanted the daughter Dominic cherished most, the one he believed would unlock the Bellamy empire. He shot Dorian a triumphant look. "This time, the sons and the company will be mine," that look said. Dorian only smiled. If someone had to play the fool, he was glad it was Killian. Marissa hesitated, clearly unsettled by Killian's choice, but he bent close and whispered something into her ear. Whatever it was, it worked immediately. Her face changed, greed flickering beneath her composed expression. She turned to Dorian with a cold, satisfied smile. "Since Killian has chosen Rosalie," she said, "you will marry Genevieve." She slid a document across the table. "As a sign of your gratitude, you'll sign this and formally give up any claim to the Blackwood inheritance." Dorian looked down at the paper, then up again, wearing the expression of a stunned, obedient son. "Of course," he said. "That's wonderful." Marissa clearly did not expect agreement so quickly, but that only made her happier. She grabbed a pen from her purse and shoved it toward him. Dorian signed without hesitation. The second his signature dried, she snatched the document away as if it had already become treasure in her hands. Killian stood, pleased with himself. Finally, he muttered as he left. "A little peace. Once I marry Rosalie and inherit both families, Dorian can beg me for pocket change if he wants." Dorian listened to their footsteps fade. They had no idea what he knew. Blackwood Holdings was not the respectable company they believed it to be. It was a criminal operation wrapped in expensive suits and polished branding, a front for money laundering and hidden corruption. In 3 years, the entire structure would come crashing down. Investigators would expose the money trail, the threats would start, and the family would be dragged into a nightmare they would never be able to escape. In his first life, Dorian had spent his own money and influence shielding them from the disaster, cleaning up mess after mess, covering scandals, and preserving the family name even when they had done nothing to deserve it. This time, he would not save them. In fact, he would make sure the collapse happened exactly as it should. The wedding with the Bellamys was held jointly, as both brothers were married on the same day. In his first life, Dominic had personally guided Dorian through the ballroom, introducing him to every powerful guest, every investor, every man whose approval could shape a career. This time, Dominic led that same circle of influential people straight toward Killian. Across the crowded room, Killian shot Dorian a look of pure victory. He thought he was the center of the evening. Then a soft voice came from beside Dorian. "Does that bother you?" He turned. Genevieve Bellamy stood there in her wedding dress, poised and elegant, with a cool beauty that made her seem almost untouchable. She was the kind of woman people admired from a distance because they were too intimidated to come close. Dorian glanced back at the room. Not really, he said. A man's future should be built by his own merit. For the first time, surprise flickered in Genevieve's expression. Then, slowly, a small smile formed on her lips. You're different, she said. Dorian Blackwood. Before he could answer, Dominic returned to the ballroom with a distinguished white-haired man at his side. Killian instantly straightened, eager to impress. He rushed forward with practiced confidence, ready to greet the guest of honor. But the old man barely spared him a glance. His eyes moved past Killian. Past Marissa. Past the cluster of eager socialites. And landed on Dorian. He stopped walking. His brow creased as though he were trying to place a memory. Seeing this, Killian hurried to step in front of Dorian. You're in the wrong section, he snapped. Can't you see you're interrupting him with that cheap suit? Then he turned to the older man and bowed his head. Mr. Harrington, forgive him. We don't know him. I'll remove him immediately. But before Killian could say another word, Mr. Harrington walked right past him and took Dorian's hand. You're Dorian Blackwood, aren't you? Dorian smiled. Mr. Harrington. It's good to see you again. The color drained from Killian's face. Marissa froze. Mr. Harrington smiled warmly, clearly delighted. That presentation you gave in London last year was exceptional, he said. It completely changed the way I looked at the market. I had to leave before I could get your contact information. I've regretted that ever since. Dorian inclined his head. The honor was mine, sir. I believe you gave my assistant your number afterward, Mr. Harrington said. At once, the influential figures in the room began drifting toward Dorian. Not Killian. Not Marissa. Dorian. The center of gravity had shifted. Killian's jaw tightened so hard it looked painful. He grabbed Genevieve's arm and stormed away, fury radiating off him like heat from a furnace. Dorian's phone buzzed a few minutes later. A message from Killian. Just wait. Bellamy Enterprises will be mine. Dorian read it once and put the phone away. He knew better than to care. After the wedding, Dorian took Genevieve back to his apartment. Before he could open the door, she stopped him. You're decent, she said quietly. A good man. But I'm sorry. I can't be a real wife to you. She lifted her eyes and met his directly. We can live our own lives. No questions. No expectations. Is that acceptable? Genevieve was breathtaking. Even in silence, she drew attention. At the wedding, men had stared too long. Women had admired her from behind polite smiles. She looked like someone carved from marble and lit from within. Dorian held her gaze for a moment. You're in love with someone else, he said. She nodded slowly. When I was a child, my family stayed at a lake house, she said. I went swimming alone, the current pulled me under, and I couldn't get back to shore. A boy saved me. I never found out who he was, but I never forgot him. She touched the pendant at her throat and pulled it free. Half of a custom charm. Dorian's hand moved before he even thought about it. He reached beneath his shirt and drew out the matching half. Genevieve's eyes widened. It was me, he said quietly. In his first life, it had taken him years to uncover that truth. Genevieve had never truly loved Killian. She had remained distant, emotionally untouchable, because her heart still belonged to the boy who had saved her that day. Him. Back then, Dorian had already been married to Rosalie, already had children, and had no right to act on what he felt. Not until after the betrayal. Not until after he discovered the truth. Not until it was too late. This time, he was not going to make the same mistake. Genevieve stared at him, tears gathering in her eyes. Dorian did not rush her. He simply escorted her to her room like a gentleman. But just as he closed the door to his own bedroom, a soft knock sounded. He opened it and found Genevieve standing there, her expression resolved, steady, and no longer uncertain. I've waited long enough, she whispered. Then she was in his arms. The night belonged to them. Months passed. At Bellamy Enterprises, Killian was fast-tracked because Dominic still favored him. He was promoted rapidly, given responsibilities he hadn't earned, and praised far more than he deserved. He strutted through the office like the future belonged to him by birthright. One afternoon, he cornered Dorian in the break room and offered him $1 million to quit. Dorian told him exactly where he could put the money. Killian's face went red with fury. Dorian, meanwhile, kept his head down and worked. He used the skills he had built in college, the discipline he had never been allowed to display in his first life, and he rose steadily through the company. He earned respect the hard way. Soon, he stood at the same managerial level as Killian. The day his promotion was announced, his team insisted on taking him out for drinks. Just as they were about to leave, Killian burst into the office, voice booming with false cheer. "Drinks are on me tonight, everyone. We're celebrating." He spread his arms and flashed a proud grin directly at Dorian. "My wife is pregnant." The room erupted in congratulatory chatter. Killian's gaze sharpened, locked on Dorian. "Once my son is born, I'll be the one running Bellamy Enterprises. And when that happens, there'll be promotions and raises for all my loyal employees." Dorian nearly laughed. Because in his previous life, just before the explosion, he had heard Rosalie on the phone. Her voice had been tight with panic. "It's your fault," she had whispered. "I'm pregnant again. Dorian hasn't touched me in weeks. How am I supposed to explain this one?" The man on the other end had laughed. "Fine. Say the baby came early. Haven't the first 3 been enough for you?" That conversation had shattered Dorian's world. He investigated quietly and discovered the truth. Rosalie had been having a long-term affair with Dominic's personal assistant, Malcolm. Dominic had forbidden the relationship, so Rosalie and Malcolm had devised a plan. She would marry Dorian, continue the affair, and pass Malcolm's children off as Dorian's in order to secure the Bellamy fortune. Once Dominic was out of the way, they intended to remove Dorian too. They never got the chance. Killian's murder had taken everyone out first. Now Dorian looked at his brother's smug face and saw nothing but a giant warning sign. When Killian announced Rosalie's pregnancy to Dominic the next day, the old man was delighted. "My first grandchild," he said, clapping Killian on the back. "Wonderful." Killian beamed. But before the moment could settle, Genevieve suddenly turned pale beside Dorian. She covered her mouth, clearly nauseous. Dorian was at her side in an instant. Dominic's cane hit the floor as he hurried over. They rushed her to the hospital. The doctor confirmed the news. Genevieve was pregnant. Dorian stared at her, overwhelmed by a joy so pure it almost hurt. Killian, standing in the corner, sneered. "What a coincidence," he said. "She sees Rosalie is pregnant and suddenly she is too. Did you pay off the doctor to fake this? Trying to cheat your way into the inheritance?" The doctor looked up, anger hardening his expression. "That's a serious accusation against this hospital," he said coldly. "You may be sued for slander." Killian sputtered, trying to recover, but Dorian stepped forward, apologized to the doctor, and calmly escorted his brother out of the room. "What's your problem?" Killian demanded in the hallway, all faux outrage and wounded pride. "Just wait. Rosalie's having a boy. Triplets." "I know it." Dorian just smiled. He was right about the triplets. He was just wrong about everything else. 6 months later, Killian took Rosalie for prenatal testing. The moment he got the results, he called Dorian in a frenzy. "We got the results," he shouted. "It's triplet boys, just like I said." His voice was thick with smug satisfaction. "So, Dorian, are you and Genevieve going to check your baby, or are you too scared?" Dorian was walking with Genevieve when the call came. His hand rested gently on her stomach, feeling the faint flutter of life within. He had never been happier. "Maybe you should spend some time with your own wife," he said evenly. "Oh, don't worry," Killian snapped. "Dominic sent Malcolm to look after her personally." Dorian nearly laughed. "I heard your wife is craving spicy food," Killian went on. "Everyone knows that means she's having a girl." Dorian shook his head. "Did you ever go to high school biology, Killian?" he asked. "Besides, I don't care whether we have a son or daughter. I'll love our child no matter what, because the child is mine." Killian swore and hung up. A few days later, Bellamy Enterprises' most influential partner arrived at the office. Killian stood polished and ready, his hair slicked back so tightly it looked painful. He positioned himself at the front of the entrance hall, ready to greet the men like a prince receiving tribute. But the investor walked right past him. Without even slowing down, he crossed the room and embraced Dorian instead. It turned out he was Dominic's brother-in-law, Genevieve's uncle. Killian stood frozen, humiliation darkening his face with every passing second. The investor clapped Dominic on the shoulder. "I like this one," he said. "Dorian's a good man. The company is in good hands." "That's not decided yet," Killian blurted out. "Rosalie is due any day. Dad said whoever has the first son inherits everything." The smile vanished from Dominic's face. "Boy or girl, it makes no difference to me," he said coldly. The investor gave Dominic a knowing look, patted his shoulder once more, and walked away. After he left, Killian muttered under his breath, "Old fool. Who do you think you're kidding? Just wait until my wife gives you your first grandson. You'll hand over the company whether you like it or not." Dorian gave him one last look and said nothing. Genevieve later told him truths Killian had never known, truths that explained many things in their family. Dorian had no intention of revealing any of them to his brother. 2 months remained until Genevieve's due date, and her belly was round and full. Dorian became almost absurdly protective. He baby-proofed the entire apartment, patted the sharp corners, checked locks, rearranged furniture, and worried over every possible danger. Genevieve watched him with a soft smile, amused by his seriousness. One afternoon, just as they were about to go for a walk, Killian called again. He said he had consulted a mystic who declared that the day was especially auspicious. He and Rosalie had decided to induce labor at 7 months. Genevieve gasped. "Is he insane?" They rushed to the hospital. Dominic was already there, pacing furiously. Rosalie had already gone into the operating room. When Killian saw them arrive, he smiled and waved a stack of papers in the air. "Just wait, Dad. Your 3 grandsons are about to be born." Then, with irritating confidence, he added, "While we're waiting, why don't you sign this will? I've had it prepared already. All you need to do is sign." Dominic's face hardened into stone. "Am I on my deathbed, or are you just that eager to see me buried?" Killian's expression shifted, but only for a second. Dominic's fury boiled over. He began coughing violently, then in rage hurled the glass of water in his hand at the floor. As Dorian and Genevieve hurried to steady him, Killian flinched backward, stumbled, lost his footing, and tumbled down the nearby staircase. He hit the bottom hard. Before anyone could react, the operating room doors swung open. A family member, a nurse, called. Killian limped to his feet and rushed toward her. "Boy or girl?" he demanded. The nurse gave him a flat look. "The mother delivered 3 healthy babies. Once she's in recovery, the family can speak to the doctor." Killian roared in disbelief. The nurse didn't even blink. "This is a hospital. Keep your voice down." Then she adjusted her glasses and added, "You have 3 beautiful, healthy daughters. Congratulations." Killian stared at her as if she had spoken another language. Then he sank slowly to the floor. "No," he muttered over and over. "That's impossible." The nurse, seeing his state, wisely wheeled the babies away to the nursery. Then Killian jerked up, panic flashing across his face. "There's been a mistake," he shouted. "You mixed them up. Those are my children." Dominic's hand flew to his chest. He hammered the cane against the floor in fury. Dorian rushed to him, gave him his heart medication, and signaled for a doctor to examine Killian. One of Killian's legs had broken in the fall. After they set it in a cast, his first demand was for a paternity test. "There's no way those 3 girls are mine," he insisted. Dominic struck him across the other leg with his cane. The crack echoed through the hallway. Now both his legs were broken. The hospital moved him and Rosalie into the same room, their legs suspended in traction, their future already curdling around them. 3 months later, on the day Killian and his family were discharged, Genevieve went into labor. Dorian waited outside the delivery room, his nerves stretched thin. Killian appeared beside him at some point, silent now, eyes fixed on the closed doors. 2 hours later, a nurse stepped out holding a small bundle. Congratulations, she said. It's a healthy baby girl. Mother and daughter are doing well. Dorian took his daughter into his arms, and something deep and sacred settled in his chest. When he looked up, he saw Killian staring at the baby with a smile of triumph spreading across his face. "See," Killian said. "You had a daughter too. My girls were born first, which means Bellamy Enterprises is still mine." He was still smiling when the nurse returned with another bundle. "And here's the little brother," she said. "Congratulations. You have beautiful twins." Killian froze. "That's not possible," he stammered. He looked as though the world had just shifted beneath him. He went home in a frenzy and demanded paternity tests for all the children, insisting that Dorian do the same. Dorian and Genevieve thought the request was absurd, but they agreed. To Dorian's surprise, Rosalie did not object. She knew Killian was not the father, so she had no reason to panic. Dominic said nothing, but his expression toward Killian had already turned contemptuous. He pulled Dorian aside, clapped a hand on his shoulder, and said quietly, "Keep up the good work, son." The test results came back quickly. Rosalie's triplet daughters were biologically Killian's. Dorian's children, however, the son and daughter born to Genevieve, did not share his DNA. The entire family was present when the results were read, including Marissa. Killian waved the paper with manic excitement. "See," he shouted. "Dorian's kids aren't his." Marissa smirked and folded her arms. "Well, Dominic," she said, "it seems your precious Genevieve has been cheating on my son. Quite the scandal, isn't it? But we're willing to be generous. Sign the company over to Killian, and we'll forget this whole messy affair. After all, even if they're girls, at least they carry our family blood." Genevieve's face went pale. "The results have to be wrong," she cried. "I know who the father of my children is." Killian sneered. "Don't bother lying." He turned to Dorian with fake pity. "Don't feel too bad. The kids might not be yours, but you still have the wife. With a woman like that, maybe you can try again." Dorian listened to all of it calmly. Then he smiled. "I demand a second test." Killian barked a laugh. "Still fighting? Fine. If the results come back the same, you'll walk into the street with a megaphone and shout that your wife cheated on you. Then you'll crawl to me on your hands and knees like a dog while you watch me sign the papers making me CEO." Dorian and Dominic each plucked a strand of hair and handed the samples over. Then Dorian looked at Dominic. "Sir, did you personally take the last samples to the lab?" Dominic shook his head. "No. Malcolm handled it." The moment Dorian heard that name, he saw the smallest flicker of panic in Rosalie's eyes. He smiled. "This time, I'll deliver the samples myself." Killian snapped, "No. What if you switch them?" "A fair concern," Dorian said. "Then we'll go together." Killian agreed immediately, certain he was being clever. On the way, he leaned toward Rosalie and whispered, "He's only delaying the inevitable. This is going to be fun to watch." Rosalie's face stayed rigid. Dorian simply wrapped an arm around Genevieve's shoulders and kept walking. When they reached the testing facility, he held the sealed evidence bags carefully in his hand. Then Rosalie stumbled as she passed him, stumbling forward and crashing into him with a sharp cry. The bags flew from his grip and scattered across the pavement. A sudden gust of wind caught the open packets and swept the hair samples away. Killian whirled on him, furious. "You did that on purpose. You tripped her to destroy the evidence." Dorian ignored him. "The hair is gone," he said. "We can just provide new samples." But before they could enter the building, masked men emerged from around the corner, knives in hand, rushing straight toward them. Rosalie screamed and ran. Killian shoved Dorian directly into their path and bolted after her. Dorian pushed Genevieve behind him and told her to call 911. The men were obviously hired. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had targeted a combat veteran. The police arrived quickly. Dorian walked away with a few scrapes. Genevieve was completely unharmed. Dominic was furious and ordered a full investigation. Then he personally took the new samples to the lab. On the day the results were delivered, he summoned everyone to his study. Killian was already there, a megaphone sitting on the table beside him, his face bright with twisted anticipation. Dominic opened the envelope. Then suddenly clutched his chest. He gasped, convulsed, and collapsed to the floor. Genevieve cried out and rushed to fetch his emergency medication. But Rosalie moved faster. She pulled a small vial from her purse, uncapped it, and reached to pour the pills into Dominic's mouth. In a blur, Dorian was across the room, his hand locked around her wrist. "What are you doing?" she shrieked. "Are you trying to kill him?" "No," Dorian said coldly. "That would be you." At his words, Dominic stopped shaking. He sat up perfectly fine. Rosalie's face went white. Then the study doors swung open. A team of police officers came in and surrounded the room. Dorian took the vial from Rosalie's hand and gave it to the lead detective. Killian sputtered in disbelief as he and Rosalie were both taken into custody. Marissa screamed. She protested. She threatened. No one listened. The lab tests revealed the pills had been replaced with a fast-acting poison. The person behind the switch was Malcolm, Dominic's assistant. Under interrogation, the entire conspiracy came to light. Killian's 3 daughters were not his. Just like in the first life, they were Malcolm's. With the paternity test looming, Rosalie had realized her secret was about to be exposed. Her reputation would be ruined and her chance at the Bellamy inheritance would vanish. So she decided to kill Dominic first. She had not counted on Dorian remembering everything. This time, he went to Dominic before anyone else and told him the whole truth. Together, they set the trap. Dominic had faked the heart attack to draw Rosalie out, and she fell directly into it. Rosalie was sent to prison. Killian, when he learned the truth, destroyed his own house in a rage, screaming about how Rosalie had made a fool of him, given him 3 daughters that weren't even his, and cost him the Bellamy fortune. At the exact right time, the news about Blackwood Holdings' illegal activities broke publicly. Dorian had been the anonymous source. He could not let them continue harming innocent people. Marissa, who had spent years living off the company's dirty money, panicked immediately. But this was not something money could fix. In the end, Killian betrayed his own mother and blamed everything on her. Marissa, who had expected her son to protect her, completely broke. She attacked him, scratching his face in a frenzy while the truth about Dorian's parentage finally spilled out in the middle of their screaming match. When Dominic learned they had lied to him for years and passed Dorian off as Marissa's son, his fury was absolute. Their deception was the final straw. He cut them off completely. Marissa received a life sentence. As for Dorian, Dominic personally appointed him executive vice president of Bellamy Enterprises. "I don't care about your background," Dominic told him. "What I cannot forgive is deception. A man with that kind of character could never lead this company the right way." He clapped Dorian on the shoulder, smiling for the first time with genuine warmth. "But you, Dorian, I trust. It should have been over." And for a while, it was. On his children's first birthday, Dominic threw a lavish party for his grandchildren and officially announced that Dorian would be his successor. Later that night, Dorian went to the restroom and found Killian there. Because of the inheritance document he had signed earlier, Dorian was shielded from the fallout of Blackwood Holdings' collapse. Killian, however, was ruined. He was drowning in debt, still carrying himself with the hollow arrogance of a fallen prince. It took a few broken teeth from a loan shark to bring him down to earth. Now Killian stood in a janitor's uniform, looking like a man who had finally run out of lies. "You came back too, didn't you?" he asked flatly. Dorian nodded. Killian's face twisted with rage. "Why didn't you tell me?" he shouted. "You enjoyed watching me look stupid, didn't you? Watching me lose everything." Dorian nodded again. Why would he say anything else? Then he decided to give Killian one last truth. "You were wrong from the beginning," he said. "In both lives, Dominic didn't favor Rosalie's husband because he loved Rosalie more. He favored me because Genevieve never wanted the company. She loves art and literature. She begged her father to give it to her sister instead." Killian stared at him, stunned. "And Dominic never cared only about having a grandson," Dorian continued. "He gave me the company in the first life because he saw my potential. He saw that I worked hard. You were so obsessed with having a son that you never bothered proving your own worth. That's why he gave up on you. It was never about Rosalie having daughters. Your failure was your own. Killian said nothing for a long time. His face contorted into something ugly and broken. Then, with a forced smile, he said, "Come on, little brother. Help me out here. You're the heir now. Just say the word, and my creditors will back off." Dorian looked at the pathetic man standing before him and remembered the boy who used to chase him through the halls with a stick, calling him a stray dog the family had picked up out of pity. So he smiled. Then he gave Killian back his own words. "You're just a dog. Shouldn't you be grateful for scraps?" Killian's face turned purple. This was Dad's company too, he shouted. For his sake. Dorian cut in sharply. What about my mother's sake, when he destroyed her life? What about my sake, when he dragged me into that house just to let you and your mother torture me? It's over, Killian. You will never get another thing from me in this life. I'm going to build something good. You can rot in the gutter where you belong. Killian began screaming. Security heard the noise and dragged him out, throwing him from the venue. He glared back at Dorian with pure hatred, muttering something under his breath as he was hauled away. That night, after putting the children to bed, Dorian headed toward his room and noticed a dark shape flickering in the kitchen. He walked toward it without hesitation. The moment he stepped inside, a blade flashed in the dim light and drove straight toward his chest. Killian's wild laughter filled the room. I was going to open a gas line and see if I could get another chance, he said breathlessly. But killing you now is just as good. In the end, I still win. He let go of the knife handle and expected Dorian to collapse. Instead, the blade clattered harmlessly to the floor. It had not pierced his shirt. Dorian dusted himself off calmly. Before Killian could react, his security detail emerged from the shadows and tackled him to the ground. I knew you wouldn't stop, Dorian said evenly. So I prepared. He tapped his chest. Bulletproof vest. The bodyguards had been waiting all along. Killian roared like a trapped animal as they dragged him away. Dorian never looked back. Killian received a long prison sentence. Inside, his temper made him enemies even there, and by the time he was released, his mind had broken. People said he wandered the streets smiling to himself while eating out of garbage cans. When Dorian heard that news, his daughter was singing in the living room while his son gave him and Genevieve back rubs. Genevieve was pregnant again. Their third child was on the way. Dorian looked across the room and saw Dominic brewing tea, smiling as he called the grandchildren over to have the first taste. He brushed a hand over Genevieve's shoulder and asked softly, "Are you tired? You should rest." She smiled at him. For the first time in his life, Dorian understood what peace felt like. There was nothing left to fight for. Nothing left to fear. Only sunlight, laughter, family, and a future that belonged to him alone. And this time, when life finally gave him a second chance, he did not waste it.